I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Swanton Planning Commission on Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. I don't have an agenda. That's what I was looking for because I usually read that.
Earl, you want to call the select board meeting to order?
Yes, I'll call the select board meeting for this special planning meeting.
I'll call the village trustees to get, sorry about the village trustees meeting for the special joint commission meeting for the town and planning commission. Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025.
Agenda review. Do we all have to go through the whole thing? Am I don't know what I'm doing here.
You're doing great.
You're good.
Good. Agenda review. Anybody got anything they want to add?
Nope.
Okay. And we're gonna get into the land use. Perfect. Hey, Heather. You're right here. We're gonna jump right in, and I'll probably punt to Corey.
Robin, can you please state your full name for the record?
Sure, Rolton Pierce, representing Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity.
Thank you.
I'm probably going to kind of punt to Corey here and have him give a quick overview of some of the highlights. You guys will see in this document there's a lot that's been crossed out. Part of what we were trying to do was consolidate, clean up, make it shorter, very similar to what we did with the town plan as well. And another thing, a big thing Corey did was try to link directly to state statute as much as we could, which decreased quite a bit of verbiage as well within the document, so that as things do get updated from time to time through the state, it'll automatically be updated here in these bylaws. So those are just a couple highlights, but I'll let Corey kind of.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. For the record, my name is Corey Parent, locally, and I'm public affairs. Happy to have worked with the Planning Commission for the last over a year on this. We've done a lot of work, and a lot of the work has been centered around new laws the legislature's passed over the past couple of years to increase housing density across the state of Vermont, to spur the housing crisis the state's in. So I think for the high level, what you'll see is we went through a lot of stuff in detail. We consolidated where we could, including districts. For example, your current bylaws have 3 residential districts, a rural, a moderate density one, and then a more dense one, which is your village. This new state law really depends around municipal water and sewer and not having sewer, so we shrunk that to 2 districts, basically residential water and sewer, wherever your water and sewer lines run and can run, and then residential, which is every other place that isn't going to have water and sewer be served by water and sewer, because really there's 2 new minimum law standards there. And what those are is, and this is state, we can't control this, wherever you have municipal water and sewer service, you cannot require a lot to be bigger than 1/5 of an acre. And you have to allow up to 4 units on any of those size lots.
Can that be bigger than 1/5?
Yeah, we cannot require a lot to be bigger than 1/5 of an acre.
With sewer and water.
With sewer and water. So we can't say the minimum lot size in the village now is a 1/4 acre. The state says you need to allow 5 lots. An acre is what they basically do it.
With both those on site or one or the other?
Both.
Both. Okay, so but if that one has one or the other,
Then we go back to the district, which we went to 1 acre in those places where there's no water and sewer. So that kind of matches where you've traditionally been in the state. That's their guidance there. And then where there's not water and sewer, we can't deny a duplex on any of those lots anymore under state law. They have to allow at least 2 units. And so that drove a lot of kind of the density conversations that we had. You'll see in these districts and some updates we've had, Earl came to our last meeting. We're much more aggressive in what will become the water and sewer residential district. We up lot coverage. You were traditionally, I think, at like 35 or 40%. That's gone up to 65%. You used to call it building coverage. We called it lot coverage because it's all impervious surface. That is much more relevant across the state because the confusion around building coverage is, well, does my driveway count as part of that? Or by letter of law, no, because it's only the building coverage, so we call it lot coverage, which is your impervious surface for water quality and stormwater and all that. So we bumped that a little, kind of shrunk back the setbacks, just because as we get to these small lots, you have to make them so that people can reasonably build on them. And that lot size, we actually, instead of calling it a fifth of an acre, which is 8,712 square feet, we're seeing places like St. Albans City and some others in the area just call it 8,700 square feet is the minimum lot size on that fifth of an acre, so that we're not fighting over 12 square feet to make that lot size.
I do wanna make one, so to preface too, I probably should have done this before. The last time we did a bylaw rewrite, we kind of came to the final meeting, to the select board, and Earl might have been on the board at the time.
Possible.
Someone on the board, a couple people had some input at the time, and we were like, we're at the end zone, right? And it's like, wow, this would have been nice, so we had to shift out the meeting. So the intention of this was to kind of bring everybody to the table, make sure you guys really had a good idea. We answered the questions that you may have based upon this, and make sure everybody has enough time, so that when we do get to that final meeting and we walk in and hand this document to the select board, it's a stamp. And with a lot of these changes, like Corey jumped right into, it is going to change the look of some of our area. And especially like the Southern Growth District. Earl showed up at our last meeting and came up with a great idea that we didn't even think of, but adding industrial use or light manufacturing out into that Southern Growth District kind of makes sense at this point, and that was something we hadn't thought of. But Earl may have brought up at that final meeting that we then would have been trying to merge into a document that, as you can see, has a lot of red line in it right now. So we kind of want to merge those changes before we really clean up the whole document, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So
That was the intention.
Yep. We also, right now you have other areas where we consolidated districts. You had shoreline river, shoreline lake, shoreline in the state's regulation. We're gonna call that one district now, because we have to follow the state regulations for that. So instead of two different colors on the map, it'll just be one, it's shoreline. We got rid of this you have this little weird four corners here. It has its own district, the transportation, TSA advisory district.
Yeah.
We kind of merged that more because the feel from the planning commission is you want basically from the interstate down the street into your corridor to look similar, and right now you just have different rules every couple blocks, and so trying to align it so that as people come into the, as you develop through, hopefully it has a more consistent look there. So
So you guys know, some of the stuff that we have added and consolidated was from things, and Jim may even be able to speak to this, and I know I had a conversation with my mom about it. Some of those things were based upon like specific projects or specific things 20-25 years ago, where something popped up and things were a little bit different, so they would kind of change those districts around a little bit. And now things have all kind of blended a little bit more and trying to make it a little more uniform across the village, mainly for some of those things. So that's where that thought process kind of came from, because there was 14?
yeah, and we cut the travel service area. We cut neighborhood commercial light district because you already have a neighborhood commercial district. And we had the debate and looking at other towns.
Where did it even
like,
come from?
How do you really
know,
define
like-
between commercial light and neighborhood commercial is usually a watered down commercial district already. So having a neighborhood commercial light is even more watered down. We're kind of like there wasn't much of a difference, so we're like, let's just combine those districts. So we'll still have a recreation conservation district, one shoreline district, a rural district, which is right now your agricultural residential. We're getting rid of moderate density residential, which was your R3, because under the new state housing laws, you either have water and sewer or you don't. And that's kind of the line in the sand. We still kept the central business, the neighborhood commercial, industrial district, a commercial a full commercial district. We didn't touch the flood hazard overlay district. We didn't touch Native American sites overlay district, and then you still have the Southern Growth District. But we consolidated. You're still heavy on the number of districts. Most municipalities have about 7 or 8. You're still sitting at about 11. So that just creates more confusion in lines, and usually people want you to adjust lines in time. So we said, look, we think this is a good consolidation at this time. Maybe in the future, there's an opportunity to consolidate further as the town develops a little bit, but for now, we feel good with this consolidation.
And some of that's in-house stuff too, right? Like Amy spends a lot of time, someone comes in for a permit, well, why does it work here and not work there? And when I can see that building across the street or whatever it might be. So again, it's uniformity, it's about, you know, having flow, but also, administratively, it should help
Yeah, and
with some of that stuff.
and your DRB talked to us about, they get a lot of cases that they feel like they don't need to see. So we try to make it so that you can have much more administrative review. Again, like technically today, if you were to build a 4-unit in the village, you'd have to go in for the DRB because it's a conditional use, even though the state basically requires the DRB to give the permit. So we're just moving that in-house. So Amy or whoever your zoning administrator is can approve that. And it's not going to your DRB and taking up their time, you know, so they're not having 10 cases come in at a spot.
Because at one time you guys were hearing from the public how it was taking a lot of time to get into those DRB meetings because they were just so full because there was so much. One of the things we did, however, do was there was room for some variances within our bylaws, and it's gonna be much harder to get a variance because we just pushed everything back to try and take some of that load off the DRB and just make it easier to just, but people are gonna find that it's gonna be much harder to come in when you say you need 2 feet. Well, you're already at 15 feet. At 25, those 2 feet doesn't make much of a difference, but at 15, 2 feet is a big chunk.
Your current bylaws have a pretty well-defined plan that basically the DRB has to give you a 30% variance if you show up to the DRB. So the planning commission took the stance of, well, if we're basically already guaranteeing we're gonna give them a 30% variance no matter what, let's just build that as the new standard and not allow that variance, to Ross's point.
Makes
So
sense.
if we were at 20, we're gonna go down to 15 feet and then we're just not gonna allow the variance. We're just gonna give it to you so we're not loading up the docket, to your point, over something you basically say you're gonna give them. We looked at building height, so under state law too, and this was consideration, wherever we set your building height, if they want to come in and do an affordable housing project, we have to allow them 1 story higher than our bylaws offer. This was 2 housing bills ago that came in. So we had a conversation with your fire department. What do you have for a ladder truck? How high can you reasonably get? You have a 75-foot ladder truck, so they're kind of comfortable in the 60-foot range, you know,
We
for
kept
building
it
height. So
story
we
below
kept most of your residential districts at 35 at 2.5 stories. So if they come in, they can add that 3rd story and go up to about 45 feet. In the commercial districts and Southern Growth District, we did 4 stories or 60 feet. But we can still, and St. Albans Town has the same size ladder truck as you guys, and that's kind of how their standard was as well. But we were looking to not set a standard that all of a sudden someone comes and builds and now you need to buy a new truck. You know, we didn't want to get you into that scenario where,
It's kind of outside of what they could manage and
Right.
so looking
yeah.
down the road, will it happen?
Where the post office is,
Mhm.
what district is that considered?
that's your central business
Yeah,
district.
that would
And
allow for
that would
that.
fall under
So we've got,
60 feet?
no, your central business district's 35 and a half.
I thought we did because we talked about Merchants Row at one point.
We might have done it.
Where is it?
I'm just looking at the district.
The only reason I ask is, you know, if somebody comes in and decides they wanna purchase a part of,
Oliver,
Ollie.
mute yourself.
I was wondering if that was done. Where's my phone? I'll text him. Oh, he muted it.
I got it.
I'm just looking at.
Central business, depth. There's no heights on this one. There we go. 4 stories or 60 feet.
4 stories is 60 feet.
Central business.
Okay.
We were thinking, you know,
And there's already a lot of code stuff so anything basically over three stories and above in the state of Vermont requires sprinklers. You're in the commercial class, so any
Yep.
kind of residential building in there is gonna, or commercial building is gonna hit those standards, but
So if somebody wanted to come in and do a 5 or 6, then conversations need to be had and,
yeah, so we would,
they couldn't do 6.
if they did it at say Champlain Housing Trust bought
They could only do
the
5.
post office, they could do 5. Because our bylaws allow 4, state law allows them to go 1 story above that.
yep,
So the max they'd be able to do is 5 stories, which keeps us under that 75 feet, which is a great rear ladder
Okay.
truck to get to.
Yep.
We kind of capped it so that, you know, if you took that extension, we weren't gonna put
Equipment.
your equipment, I mean, a ladder truck's $1 million, now we didn't wanna
that.
all of a sudden get you into a mess there. So there was that thought process, and we had the fire chief come in on, sometimes we were like, why'd you set that number?
right.
That's why we set
Okay,
that
no,
number.
thank you.
And they did, just while we're talking about fire, we also did, it probably doesn't pertain to you guys so much as it does the town, but did have quite a bit of conversation about, you know, private roads, driveways, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And the fire department, and Reg, I believe, was at that meeting, had some input about a lot of that stuff.
And that actually speaks to another area where there was a lot of conversation we had to do. So in your current bylaws, it says that 3 housing units, it needs to be a private road. And we had to make clear that 3 lots, it's a private road, especially in the town, because of this situation where someone can build a duplex on a lot. They might only have 2 lots, and you could theoretically have a shared driveway with 2 lots, and each one could be a duplex. Well, 4 housing units technically requires a private road. Do we want a private road for every 2 lot? So things got kind of in that, we went to 3 lots. Anything 3 lots and more goes to a private road.
Raise the standards, because if a private road has 3 buildings that are all duplexes at the end of them, that's 6 units. You can be looking at a fair amount of structure at the end of a goat path, essentially.
Right.
So that's why we,
Raise those. You know, other than that, I mean, we did definitional changes to Ross's point. We got some words we just wanted to define in statute. So we just referenced the state definition. So if the state ever changes the definition, we can go right back to statute. We cut back in areas. You guys had a pretty healthy adaptive reuse section, but you had like 3
Solid.
pages on adaptive reuse of barns, adaptive reuse of this, and then when we looked at it, it was basically all saying the same thing. So we consolidated those 3 items into one, just called adaptive reuse of buildings.
And-
So we're not taking up an extra 6 or 7 pages of
those
bylaw.
were specific project-based.
When you do I think I looked at this, but, when you do that adaptive, building, and there's no conditional use in that district for that, can they still use, that's the idea, is to allow them special structures,
Yeah, it's,
okay?
if there's
Where
an
our
old,
brain
if there's an
goes-
old barn that someone wants to turn into condos or apartments, and we might not have allowed that before, it allows us to use structures that have already been built in the community
Yeah.
for a better, get back on the grand list and be productive for you in a bit better way.
Where our brain goes, like Wayside, furniture, our brain, one part of that was some barn stuff. Part of that was like Chase Auto on Route 7. Look what Green Mountain Welding has done in there. That building would have never been built now,
Right.
right? But we have some Rosie's, you know what I mean? Like some of those structures scattered throughout the community that at some point are going to change of use, trying to find adaptive ways to reuse some of those structures in the community. And there was 3 different sections because there was Hamlin's was one of the projects that came in that was something we kind of came up with, a adaptive reuse of an existing commercial building. I think was based on Hamlin's. So they've all been done separately over even my time here. And by taking those 3 sections and bringing them all together, it just is more uniform across the town. It's kind of what the thought was.
Other general thoughts, we try to align you fairly well with Highgate, St. Albans Town, Milton. We looked a lot in the Milton, St. Albans Town area where we could update things because communities have a similar feel. Milton's done really well with growth, St. Albans Town's done really well with growth, so the Planning Commission had us looking there. Updated some stale, again, definitions like This was fraught with accepted agricultural practices. That's not a state thing anymore. It's required agricultural practices. So, we deleted the old definitions, put in the new terms, cited the new statute. We cleaned up statutory references. We went and checked them to make sure they're still current. Some reference to part of the law that got changed, that subsection, so we had to update those.
One thing, before I forget, one of the things in the village, you guys, we also added, and I can't remember the exact verbiage, but, essentially, if a structure was to be torn down or there's an empty lot, which there's one right now that's trying to get some permitting going, looking at where all the houses are on the street and matching the houses on the street as opposed to making them align with an arbitrary number in here, right? So if you think of like Pine Street, or you think of some of those streets, you probably know the lot I'm thinking of. Some of those streets, the houses are really close and they all fit and the neighborhood looks great, and then you come in with a new structure and that structure is 20 feet or 15 feet further back into its lot than all the other houses. It doesn't quite fit the neighborhood. So that was something else that we added.
You currently required a 35-foot setback. What we did is we stole it from Enosburg. They had a nice verbiage where basically your minimum setback is the average of the structure on each side of you, so that way it
That's interesting.
Right.
matches the current lay of the land. The hard part with bylaws and zoning, and we said this a lot, you couldn't build things you love in this community today, a lot of instances, under your zoning bylaws. Like, you couldn't build downtown St. Albans, you couldn't build where buildings touch each other in Vermont today under zoning and all these buildings people love. So it's like, I always try to remind people when we're working on bylaws, like, a lot of these neighborhoods you're talking about you love, you actually can't build under your current rules, and this is a way of
That's
like,
one of them.
we like this neighborhood the way it looks, or it looks nice, like, let's not build a random
So
home
making it
next to 20
aesthetically,
feet back.
Yeah.
making it aesthetically
Pleasing.
alike.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sorry.
Okay, that's one of the issues that, this addresses that corner lot issue. doesn't it?
Yes,
Because, you had to make a setback here and a setback here, so you lost a lot of area, and you maybe could have got another house if you didn't have to do that. And everything, but if you do it the way, like you're talking now, it's all gonna look the same, all the same distance, everything's gonna be in line. Makes perfect sense,
Well, the other big factor with that is you lose your backyard.
Yeah, that's the
Where
other thing, yeah.
People are gonna be, instead of the
Yeah.
front, you're not gonna set out front in the village being set back. And then the other thing is the value of the properties when they look out of place lowers them. I know myself, if I was looking for a place and driving down the street and saw something where they were in and out, I'd say goodbye and go on someplace else. It's just that type of, you'd be surprised the number of people that drive around and look at the neighborhood that they may want to live in.
So, there's 200 pages of bylaws here, but I think those are the most contentious things people will complain about. The density will become an issue at some point. Someone's gonna be mad a house gets cut to a 4-unit apartment building next to them, but that's state law. We have to do that. That's just where the standard is. So,
one of the other ones, I just left my brain. Oh, the lake,
Shoreline.
so essentially, we've deferred to the state, right?
Yeah.
And looking at things, if the state's gonna give them a permit to put a structure on McQuam Shore, or if they can tick all the boxes for the state of Vermont, like, allow them to kinda do that, and try and protect the shoreline in a way of allowing people to actually back some of those camps up closer to the road, giving them a little more depth in the backyard, similar to what we talked about here in the village, right? If you push all those houses way back on some of those streets, they have no backyard, and then,
you're closer to the lake, flooding more.
right, so allowing them to be a little closer to McQuam Shore or West Swanton, some of those areas, which will give them and help hopefully protect some of the shoreline. And if they're ticking all those
Yeah.
boxes for the state, like, who are we, they, at times, know better than we do.
I was looking in here, there isn't any reference, isn't there a state statute now on lakeshore development?
Yeah, so
Does
we
it
do
spec-
have, so basically you have to get your shoreline permits and
Does
all
it
that.
say that in here? I've been kinda looking for
I
it,
don't know
I
if it
really
says
haven't seen
exactly,
it, but it's a
but-
big document.
But to our point, we said you had to have those permits in place. Basically, they're gonna regulate.
And you're gonna refer to that statute there, and so if it does change in the future, the change automatically
Yeah.
takes place.
The other place we looked at that is wastewater, and it was actually in one of Joel's notes, so I'll put it, he said, we should still have an engineer. On wastewater, you have to get a state permit. It's a state permit for wastewater to turn a seasonal camp into a year-round. So instead of making us get additional documentation from an engineer, if you've got the state permit, which they put you through the ringer, we all hear about what the state makes you go through to get those permits. You don't need to go through anymore with the town.
Yeah.
You got your state
You
wastewater
satisfy
permit.
them, we're satisfied.
If the state's
Yeah.
satisfied, we're satisfied, and so if
Yeah.
the state changes their standard, we don't have to change it, because what happens a lot of times, and, you know, I'm still down there, I mean, there's gonna be a discussion this year. VHCB was just talking that the state of Vermont has some of the strictest wastewater permit requirements on like how many gallons per day is needed per bedroom. And like VHCB, which is an environmental group, and does, basically saying, we probably could have less gallons per day to get more housing built and more lots to perk and things, so the state may change their standards, so instead of us coming, you know, our standard being this, the state standard being this, and us having to do this and waiting the 6 months in between, we'll just match the state on those instances. We can't be any less restrictive than the state on this stuff, you know, we're not legally allowed to, so there's no point of, unless you guys want to be, the state always allows you to be stricter, but the planning commission didn't feel we need to be stricter on any
And
of
you're
these
talking
things.
costs associated with staff time,
Yeah.
all of those things that we already know, we're doing our best to
But
not
that's,
increase.
that's a requirement of the state, and we can't do any less than that, so, I mean,
Yeah.
people, you know, if they're not happy, they'll have to be disappointed with the state and not us.
That's a good point. One of the things we did start talking about, and I didn't really get in here, and we had a conversation at our last meeting Earl was at, is at some point, I feel we need to have a conversation about enforcement in a number of, not just zoning, but also in just a whole host of things when it comes to, you know, public safety type stuff, the roads, we did have a conversation about roads, and it doesn't necessarily pertain probably to you as much as it does to the town. Yes, it's good to ask for, you know, like a stamped, engineer's stamp on a 500-foot, 600-foot driveway to two houses, but you're talking about increasing costs there. So does it make sense to use, you know, Public Works or the fire department, someone to kind of go out and make sure that those driveways are feasible, to get a truck to the end of that 1,000-foot goat path to a house way back in the woods and kind of thing, and not
Yeah.
causing an issue down the road for the fire department if something did happen. Or you have two duplexes at the end of a 750-foot driveway that's, you know, is it feasible? Is that safe? We didn't really get too deep into that, but I think that's something in the future we should talk about. It would potentially have some costs associated, but the lister and the town zoning administrator are already going out to those. So maybe it's just Kevin or Dean or someone's able to kind of just go check on some of those things and, oh yeah, it looks, yes, this driveway's gonna be fine.
And there was a lot of rules too that we were looking at, and it's, if we can't enforce it, why do we have the rule
Exactly.
at all?
So there's a lot of
So we
stuff
need some
that's-
teeth.
Another area, just going quick, that we hit on is currently, if a structure in a district is legally non-conforming, which basically means you couldn't legally put that structure there today, but it's there because it's historic or whatnot, gets damaged in a fire. There are a lot of rules, like the construction or everything had to be done within 12 months, and we were saying that that's an unreasonable time frame in today's material and shortages and all that. So we increased getting the permits to 18 months, and then from there, they can go up to another 3 years, I think, to get through the process of rebuilding, because sometimes you're fighting with your insurance company for 12 months, and if we say you can't turn that 5-unit apartment building back into 5 units because you were fighting with your insurance company for 13 months to get paid and you didn't have the money to rebuild, like, that's not really fair, so we.
That's not good for us as a community. Why?
So we extended that timeline to be a little more reasonable. Just, it's hard to build any, houses used to go up in 3-4 months. It's 6 months to a year now to build houses in some instances, so
Hard pressed to do it in a year, some of them. depending on
so
what
we
you
were trying to be cognizant of that's an area, we kind of upped the timelines there. You had pretty strict standards on, like, road frontage, like, with 1 acre lots, you required 200 feet road frontage, which, and 200 feet, lot depth, so that's basically a perfectly square acre. We're like, that doesn't exist in a lot of places, a perfectly square acre. So we did shrink it to 150 so that so it allows it to go a little deeper. We still didn't want to get to where someone has one of them really narrow long lots, but we wanted to allow, I think 150 and 150 are minimums. So if it needs to be a little wider up front or a little narrower, that's good too in the town, because I remember when I was at the town of St. Albans, frustration thing is you already have your roads built, right? Like, if you can only fit so many houses, and now they're building out back because they can't get the road frontage. You don't want to have more roads to take care of. You just want more houses along what you already have. So that was an area we touched.
Trying to allow too with that infill, right? So if there's some of these properties in our community that are currently, 5-6 acres, 4 or 5 acres with one house on it, yes, they look great, but with the cost of things, maybe people are wanting to subdivide off a lot and kind of sell a chunk and put some money in their pocket and try and spur some of that infilled growth. So allowing that 150, and I had a conversation with my dad about it, because when I built my house, it was 300 feet. Now you're telling me it could have been 150, you know what I mean? And they have 2 lots there, and it's, things change, but, so to think the difference in 20 years, what it is to hopefully allow some of that infill.
And here's an example where we cut down on verbiage. So in section 3 of your current bylaws, it had basically you set out visibility standards. So if you're on a 50-mile-per-hour road, it needed to be 550, 450 for a 40-mile, like all that. Well, that's all in the state V-Trans B71 commercial visibility standards. So instead of having a long paragraph explaining that, we're just like, go check out their standards. If they ever change their standards, we'll kind of match that. So like, saving that section of a page over hundreds of pages, that's where we look to kind of consolidate your rules on stuff. But that's a pretty good example of that.
And you may have answered this, Corey, those won't be hyperlinked though if this is an online document.
We're gonna go through and hyperlink them all. So you're looking at like the real rough draft where it has all that. We're gonna do a clean draft where we get rid of the underlines and the cross-outs, and we'll hyperlink, so if someone's flipping through, they can just click on it and it'll open up those standards for them. So they're not going back to Google to look for them. That'll be the final cleanup. There's things highlighted, Joel asked that, like, where we reference sections because we're making changes and changing sections around. I gotta go back when this is all done to make sure those sections still tie out, because we've crossed out some, and what pages things are gonna end up on. We gotta update your table of contents and all that stuff.
Couple questions on subdivisions. Is there anything in here, and I didn't see it, so if it's there, I apologize. Is there anything in there with regards to new subdivisions and sidewalks?
No,
Requirements?
we didn't make any requirement of sidewalks on new subdivisions.
We didn't.
Why?
There's discussion about it.
We
are you
talked
talking
about-
putting sidewalks in as it's developed,
Yeah.
so that the
Brand
money
new-
is put
brand new
into
developments.
buying it, yeah. I
Well,
know
that
Ed pushed that.
conversation-
Ed pushed that a lot.
That was more of a regional planning, the reason we were talking about that was the bigger projects that go before regional planning project review have been in the past forcing, for example, Handy GMC, they forced them to put a sidewalk in front that literally starts and stops on their property. And now they're talking about putting a bike path down that road, that sidewalk is either gonna be removed and never got used and did nothing, instead of taking the money and putting it into a fund to use to maybe put in that bike path that they're, so that was part of that conversation.
What
and
about residential development, though? New residential
so
development?
we didn't necessarily talk about it on our end, but it's a good point. I mean, I also am a firm believer in the whole, not just forcing, and from sitting on policy project review at regional, it was just like a blanket, no, you need to put in sidewalks, and it didn't make any sense.
Right, but it has to be in writing. I mean, we
It
can't
does.
enforce something if it's not there.
True.
I mean, what,
Yeah.
what do other communities around us do when they do new subdivisions? Do they have it in their bylaws that, you know, a sidewalk is required?
Depending on the community, St. Albans Town has the least amount of sidewalks in the whole county. Like state-owned, they are very like, no, they try to get to a fee. They couldn't make that work. You kinda have to set like, what do you consider a subdivision? Is a 2-lot subdivision require a sidewalk, or is it a 10-lot subdivision? Sidewalks aren't cheap, especially when looking at affordability housing. It's a V-Trans last number, it's about $500 a linear foot to build a sidewalk. So if you're building 1,000 feet of sidewalk, you know, you're times 500, you know, that's your
Yeah.
engineering and all that, so it gets pretty expensive, so.
I mean, I get
We
buying it up front.
could do it, I
is
just think
cheaper.
the planning commission
Yes,
parameter
It's
from
still a lot.
your boards is at what level? Do you want it on all subdivisions? So if someone subdivides off one lot, like Ross's parents, cause now they can go to 150, should they have to put in a sidewalk for 300 feet? Or is it a 10-lot like,
But it also
those
has
are
to make
policy
sense where it goes.
decisions you guys can make, direct us, and then we can write it, but we didn't contemplate that in this bylaw.
I mean, I don't support that just because the cost of housing is really expensive right now. And if you were to add that onto what they already have to build in order to produce more homes for people to live in, that's going to squeeze the people that are buying the house, having that extra cost. I know it's cheaper now than buying it 20 years when you might need it, when more housing's built next to it and stuff like that, but I don't know, I think we're in such a crunch right now that I wouldn't wanna make it mandatory.
I mean,
But I'm not the only person on the board.
just cost perspective, if it was a 150-foot lot and just the sidewalk on that lot at $500 a linear foot, it's $75,000. Increasing the cost of that home to put in that sidewalk. Now granted, the private developer may build it cheaper than the state, but that's the number, like when you apply for grants and stuff, it's, V-Trans has a number that you can use to do your rough calculation of that.
And does it make it so that people don't wanna build here, right? So if we have all these requirements that you have to put a sidewalk in and all this other extra stuff, do people wanna even build in Swanton? Or do they wanna take the project somewhere else where they're not gonna have all those extra things? So that's stuff we took into account as well.
But and again, you look at small, you know, new families coming in, you know, sidewalks are a benefit to them. You know, they're gonna look for a development that has sidewalks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's,
I mean,
6
I'm
of one,
used to
half dozen
walking
of
on the side
another.
of the road on a bunch of these
I didn't
streets,
see
so I
it, that's
get
why I'm asking.
No,
Yeah.
it's like, what I would say and I'm not saying there won't be a development, but thinking of some of the newer developments in town right now, would a sidewalk, the cost of a sidewalk make sense? Like where my brain goes with some of the newer developments out on like Route 7, and some of what's the one we've talked about quite a bit, where the lot lines go to the center of the road.
Harvest Lane,
Harvest Lane, that,
right
I live
there.
down there.
oh, okay. But I mean, and you were talking about the depth of those lots and the sizes of those lots, so would sidewalks in your development make sense? But that would have been a big cost to Travis, that
Well-
may have been a tipping point
Well,
for
it's
that
tough
project.
too, right? Because there's no sidewalks anywhere else on Route 7 going there, so you're putting in a sidewalk when it's a private road already that we can just walk up and down. So, but I'm just wondering, a happy medium here and just proposing it is, could it be baked in that there is an easement in the front of that where if the village or the town ever decided that they wanted to put in a sidewalk, they have the right to do so, and that's at no cost to the buyer, but it allows the town to have that ability to put that in. If you wanna have that be a pedestrian walkway, you could put that in at a later date.
That would be by the width of the road in the first beginning, which I believe is now 50 feet. Am I right, Ross?
For there or in general?
No, just for
I don't know, does that right of way change if there's gonna be sidewalks on both sides?
Well, that's a good question.
I don't know the
See.
answer to that.
But the one thing that we haven't brought up yet, and it's, refers right back to Harvest Lane, is there shall be no commercial right-of-ways through any developments, PUDs or any of those. Everything's gotta be, and they cannot go to the center of the road.
Yeah, that was when we,
And that's one of them that's in there, and that's where, it's absolutely wrong to, give a development the right to go to the center of the road. Or the other thing is to allow, in their particular case, a pipeline going through the back of it. There's no reason for that. They could have been to the, as
Pushed
you're
up.
driving down it, they could have been farther to the left, redesigned it.
so what Jim's referring to with the center of the roads, essentially what they did there was instead of having those lots, the people own to the center of the road, and it allows them to have a large enough lot to make things work, but if you look at the usable lot area, it's drastically decreased because of the road, and then in their case, there's a natural gas pipeline that runs in the backyard along with a railroad track, and that pipeline, obviously you can't build, and I wouldn't wanna build, within any, not too close to a 500 PSI 16-inch gas pipeline, like that's substantial
Yeah.
amount of gas, that feeds all of Chittenden County, so, that drastically decreases, and Jim's been pushing very hard to get, building envelopes onto our Mylars, which essentially would have told you what the buildable area is on your lot when you buy it. And I understand that, and I understand Jim's thought, but I also know we've changed our bylaws substantially since I've been on this board in the last 15 years. So that means is you buy that lot today, you sell it to someone 10 years from now, and we've changed our bylaws, and that envelope is no longer accurate. So that's why I don't think we need the building envelope, but the whole center line of the road, is something that we did address in here, or it's a more of a policy thing with DRB, I believe. Does that make more sense? So essentially they're using the space of the road to account for their lot size. And I don't know any of the lot sizes in those developments, and you don't have to, but obviously those are not 1 acre lots, even though.
They're about half an acre.
Half an acre?
Yeah, most of them.
Yeah.
I think some of them are a bit bigger on the other side of the road, but at least on, as you're driving down to the right, about,
Half.
yeah.
And they got around that because.
They got a 50-foot probably right away for the gas that's out of that half acre lot.
Yeah, so it's 25 on either side of it, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a substantial chunk of land out of the back of those properties that Jim's referring to. So just looking back on some of those, and if you all didn't know, Ed stepped down from the board a couple months ago, and Jim had been attending our meetings because he had a few of these things that he wanted to talk to us about, so it was great. Jim decided to step in and help us make sure we got this to the end zone here.
Couple more questions on subdivisions.
Go ahead.
When new subdivisions are complete,
Mhm.
Is the town or village required to take over the road for plowing?
We have a policy for that, right?
There's a
Town has a new road policy.
The town has a road policy, no, we're not obligated to take over any roads. And they have to meet certain standards. The other big issue now is, and I'm sure you're well aware of this too, is stormwater.
That's my next question. I'm getting there.
Are you having problems with that, Adam?
No. I live on
So-
Spring Street, but I'm part of Jones Court.
And that is some of the concern of the select board. We did discuss this the last meeting I was with the planning commission, about wording in there. I should refer to these developers that they need to contact the town if they're considering having this be a town road in the future. Because, and it's really critical right now, because the stormwater issue that costs some money.
Yep.
And we're already dealing with a situation on Country Public Estates or whatever it is, and we got 35,000 in our budget this year. You know, and that, we may have to spend it all. I mean, the state hasn't got everything in place yet, but. And
Let them drag their feet.
I question whether these new developments, if the other taxpayers in the town ought to start taking on responsibility. And I did want to bring this up with Corey, because he mentioned at that last meeting about St. Albans Town having these stormwater districts. Can that be a requirement in our zoning bylaws, that this be created when they build these developments?
So the way most of these developments have to work is they actually need, anything that's gonna have over, it's 3 acres, but it's shrinking of impervious surface, so that's your road, your roof line, your driveways, subdivision, requires a state stormwater permit, has since the 80s. And a lot of these have to create HOAs, and people don't keep up the HOA, but they're supposed to keep up the permit. When they get mad is it creates a title issue when they go to sell, and then they get mad that, well, the town should have taken care of it. No, you should have. You bought in a development that had an HOA that you got rid of. That's your fault. They don't agree with that, but I've set up 2 stormwater utilities across town.
It doesn't go on their deed then?
Oh, it does.
Oh, it does.
So what happens, it creates a title, it's a
Absolutely.
huge title issue, because if you don't have a valid stormwater permit, theoretically, you can fail your title search, because the person buying it, you could say, look, you're on the hook to get this permit up to snuff. So when they got the permit in 1980, they might have just needed a ditch, right, a swale.
Yep.
Well, if you
Yeah.
let that permit lapse, now you gotta come up to today's standards. And today's standards might be a gravel wetland, it might be da-da-da-da-da, you gotta pay an engineer to come in and do all these studies and tell you how to do it. This is not a Swanton, this is an issue in St. Albans Town, it's an issue in Swanton, or in Milton, it's an issue, and I'm actually shocked you're not an MS4 community already, but you look a lot like MS4 communities, you're on Lake Champlain, you have village centers, you have this, but towns have set up, that's why they've set up these stormwater utilities, and you've seen them, is basically to help retrofit all these these areas, because I mean, is anyone familiar with like Clyde Allen Drive in St. Albans Town?
They just had a big meeting.
Yeah, that's a $500,000 project. It was one of the ones when I left the town we got $400,000 in grants, but those homeowners still have to come up with $100,000, which isn't anything to sniff at, but this town was able to help them get some, but more. But they've got to retrofit their whole stormwater system because they didn't keep up their HOA and do that, so.
But in the case of Jones Court, the HOA never existed. It was in writing, but that's it.
So that's ultimately, and I don't know the legal piece, but your developer, as he sold the last lot, should have turned the HOA over to the homeowners and said.
And that's part of the enforcement conversation that we
Right, and it
had.
never, I'm almost positive
well.
it never happened, and, now there's 37 or 40 of us that are gonna be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and
We could put
it's gonna be a
something
cold
in
day in
here
hell, I
that
gotta tell you.
says you have to record the HOA and who the people are with the town. I mean, the town would have to accept that responsibility and probably follow up with people on an annual basis or every
Yeah.
couple of years and say, who's the head of this HOA?
But can't that be in,
We could put that in.
we could, it should be a requirement that the developer must provide
To get the last CO, to
to,
get the
and
last
that was-
certificate of occupancy, they've gotta turn over the HOA I'm just
Yeah.
thinking out loud, like, basically to get the last certificate of occupancy, you have to have the proof of HOA,
Yep.
who's running it, and at least someone in the current neighborhood to sign off saying, yes, I'm running it.
right,
Whether it stays going for 30 or 40 or 50 years
right, exactly.
is another issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what,
But it's still
yeah, okay, we
crap.
could
It's still a bunch
certainly,
of crap, it's,
So-
Can't leave
That-
that last lot unbuilt forever to avoid that.
yeah.
Well, we've also got a current similar issue, where we had a home that got a certificate of occupancy when their cul-de-sac wasn't up to snuff, and that kind of stuff got a little loose there. But that's also the conversation I had with the developer of where you live, was about those center lines of that road. I just happened to bump into him, and he was like, yeah, well, the HOA problem is a lot of homeowners, they don't want to deal with it. They see an HOA, it's sometimes hard to sell. So by by owning to the center line of the road, everybody owns a chunk, but then you're opening up a can of worms to have homeowner disputes, like, I'm not shoveling in front of my house, it's your problem, you can drive through the snow. Or I own that, or the pothole's in front of your house, you fix the pothole type of thing. Like, that's opening up a bigger can of worms than just the issue that Jim's been, I mean, Jim talked about that as well, but I mean, in my opinion, it's the long-term stuff that's really going to cause an issue, so those HOAs and having a strong, strong policy around that, I guess, it is gonna save us some
So we need
headaches
to hold the
down road.
developers accountable, because I'll bet you $1 to donuts that the developer for Jones Court just said, "Beep,"
Yeah,
okay,
that
you know,
was,
and that was it. That was it. Nobody said anything. They let it go, and now
Yeah.
these 40 homeowners are gonna pay for it.
I
Don't
know.
feel too bad, Adam, the town is falling to the
I
same.
feel bad, trust me, I feel bad. I'm one of the 40.
What other towns are doing, just so you know, because this isn't new, there's about 12 or 13 now stormwater utilities, and this is a whole other discussion. Basically what the town does, sets up this utility, creates a fee that they charge everybody. I mean, the state of Vermont pays the town of St. Albans almost $100,000 a year for the interstate and the prison and the state parks there.
The interstate?
You get to charge
We need
everybody
to look at
everything.
that.
But you gotta charge your homeowners on it too, and
We
they don't
got-
like that $50 fee that gets added, but that money allows the town to come in over time and start to take over these and roll them into one permit. So
Right.
that way, the town doesn't have 45 permits running around town, it kinda gets, it's their MS4 permit, you're not an MS4 community. My guess is you'll be one in the next 10 years, but,
Well, and that's the hope for Jones Court, is the fact that, you know, odds are, we're gonna have to do something.
but those aren't
And-
popular in their own
But
right.
this is you know, there's an opportunity to have a conversation with the village and say, look, you know, we want this rolled into your permit. Because it's just not, you know, and we do what we have to, but,
Some
you
of
know,
that stuff.
it's not feasible, and the developers need to be held accountable for it.
And some of that stuff, we did have a conversation about rolling into some changes to this, like, we're not even done it yet, but we're already talking about, like, after we mint this, what we're gonna add to it, if you will. One of those things that we haven't gotten to, but we wanna look at is our fees. And I know, Earl had a very good point, and I think maybe it was Joel as well, you know, exempting fees
Yeah.
for, the town and the village, and the school district on permits like this. But those are things we haven't, we're trying to get this document rolling and then take a look at some of those fees and what really makes sense, because we do wanna spur growth. So I think that could be a big part of some of that added stuff down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna go back to stormwater though. Listen to what you're saying, Corey, about how St. Albans Town is handling this. Now, once this all gets done and gets rolled into the, one single permit, the cost of maintaining that permit and the stormwater runoff is still gonna fall on them same districts, not people in the other part of the town. Is
No,
that
so
correct?
No, those towns set up the utility, so
Everybody's gonna share the cost.
Everybody's gonna
long
share
and
the
the short, how utility works is you take your average of all your single-family homes impervious surface in town of St. Albans of something like 3,500 square feet. You create an ERU, your residential unit, so someone gets a $50 bill per 3,500 square feet of impervious surface. So the state of Vermont has a lot of it to come up with $100,000, right? And then you have credits, but ultimately you charge everybody a little bit, and you know, the town of St. Albans in that scenario, from a homeowner perspective, well, I have to pay $50. Well, if they raised $500,000, I'd be paying 5 cents, which would be a lot more than $50.
Yeah.
Because now nonprofits pay, the town even paid its own fee on its own roads, but it was already paying for a lot of that stuff anyway that could then be paid for by the utility, but everyone paid the fee, and became its own line item, its own budget, it's its own entity, it's a utility. It's just the user's your impervious surface. So like you have a water utility or a sewer utility or electrical utility, the stormwater utility work very similarly. And so it had its own budget, and then you pay for all your stormwater infrastructure. Now people are like, well, this gets to go away in 20 years. The town has like $16 million worth of work it has to do by 2036. Milton has like $4 or $5 million it has to do by 2036 and all this, and people are like, oh, it can be done. Well, no, these gravel wetlands need to be rebuilt every 20 years. They need to be mowed out. They need to be this. So the utility, like anything else, is never going away. But it allows you to not pay for that on the penny rate when you can defer some of that cost to V-Trans. You can defer some of that cost to the railroad pays. I mean, the railroad pays nothing, right? Ever. Well, they pay the town of St. Albans $17,000 a year, and this now the homeowner's paying an extra $50 a year, and that was not popular. And we're working on. I'm helping Milton through it now. It's never popular with voters, so I'm just throwing that out there. But
Basically, we're creating a new tax.
Exactly.
fee,
So-
but yeah.
Tax. It's a tax.
Yeah,
And it's on property,
it's on impervious surface,
Parking lot.
property.
parking lot. It's
Any
It
part.
goes to the property owner,
some
who
places
happens to
called the
own
rain
the
tax. Maryland did
service.
one, and it was called the rain tax. It is what it is, but the way I've always explained to people, this became a mess under Richard Nixon. Believe it or not, the Clean Water Act, and I've had to explain this to a lot of people. And so I started, I go, well, because they're like, who's to blame for this? I go, Richard Nixon. Clean Water Act, and then in 1988 they updated it, and they started in places like Chicago and New York City creating these MS4s. And then in 2002 it rolled to the state of Vermont, and then by about 2018 the state of Vermont started rolling it down to towns, and guess where the stuff stops? It's at the town level. And these towns are stuck implementing these new federal rules and I tell people, new developments need stormwater. We basically have to retrofit these communities back to 1763 or whenever they were founded and build stormwater infrastructure to offset all that. And that's to clean up our lake and, to stop flood resiliency and all these other things. But it's a very expensive ordeal. The average gravel wetland now is about $500,000. So like if you look on the interstate exit in St. Albans as you're heading south, they kind of did one right there that's about $500,000 to build one of those. So they're not cheap.
But again, just as a side note for Jones Court, the bigger issue is the groundwater.
Right.
Because Jones Court was built on a swamp.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
which
there's
should have
another.
never been done to begin with.
There's a whole development in town of St. Albans that was actually built right off the interstate access road. There was an actual easement the feds bought to drain there, and it was never found before they developed it, and then they developed it in like the 60s. And so literally the whole interstate's meant to drain into that neighborhood, and the neighborhood's like, well, it drains in here. We're like, yeah.
Well, that's why we got groundwater issues on Jones Court, is because of the interstate.
But all going back
I
to
got
that.
one other thing I'd really like.
Yeah.
Apparently, I agree with with some of the discussion that we might have to change some things in the future, but for now, what's in that zoning bylaw, we ought to at least include the minimum, as Adam was stating.
Yeah.
And maybe we not put it the last lot, maybe we back it to 2/3. So, they got some incentives, so we know that the permit's at least in place, and then we're gonna deal with how we're gonna finance it in the future. Cause we should be good for 5 or 10 years if they've done
Well,
everything
if
properly.
they get their permit and it's a new development, because it's not gonna help Adam, it's development, it's any new development, it's gonna be good for 30 years as long as those homeowners keep renewing their permit, which is all they have to do is pay the $200 a year fee or $250 a year fee. They're not gonna have to update that system because eventually they'll get grandfathered if the technology changes. But it's once you let that lapse that all of a sudden now they gotta come into compliance, and that's the issue we're seeing in a lot of municipalities is people didn't keep up their permits.
Well, I think
I
language
just
should
think
be
we
in
make
here.
sure
Build some
the
language in
homeowners
there,
or
because,
the
like, even if you
developers
look
are
at my
held
example,
accountable.
Yeah.
And maybe even to a sense that, once the last lot is built, they hold the permit for 5 years. I don't know, something to that effect.
The town holds the permit?
No, the
Oh,
developer.
the developer holds the permit. Oh, I missed who you
Yep,
said.
the developer holds the permit 5 years after the final lot's built, and we
Part
see
of
what
that is
happens.
a balance too, and we had this conversation about some of these other, and my personal feeling, right, is we gotta balance. We have a lot of people that are doing a lot of work in our communities and trying to build this out. So as much as I wanna keep people accountable for what they're doing, right, we also gotta be feasible with it, right? And make it possible to make some of those, like I understand what Jim's saying, about your development, Harvest Lane, for example, but it's also like, if we had made some changes to that, would there only be 4 houses in Harvest Lane? And would that project have then been feasible, or would it still be a overgrown pasture right now, which is what it was up until 5 years ago? So I'm not saying we gotta let everybody out of the barn and just do what they want, but we did have a lot of conversation about, like, yes, we need to have some teeth, yes, we need to make people, but we also wanna, like, spur what we can, because it's only gonna, that tax base, right?
But we work for the community members, the taxpayers.
True,
And we need to make sure that we're focused on those people first,
the
the
current
developer
taxpayer.
second.
Yeah, so
Because we need,
See, you go back to this business, and I'm gonna use the example down there. You are to the center of the road. So consequently, you're responsible for your own road in front of your house. The first house in gets 7 times the traffic as the last house. And as an example, they have to take care of that. Now, if that was a normal right-of-way through there, and their lot line, that road would come under the homeowners association, they'd be paying somebody to
One person.
maintain that road, plow it, and everything else. As it is right now, they own to the center of the road. As an example, there's another development, not too far from where you are, that is to the center of the road. All the houses down through were basically set back, the normal setback. Guy came in and says, I own to the center of the road, so consequently, I'm only gonna set. So now you got 3 or 4 houses straight down through that are there, and this guy's setting up towards the front of the road.
Yeah.
It's a-
Cause he measured to the center instead of the edge of the right of way.
You know, instead of going from the lot line. These are problems that need to be resolved, and the only way to do it is to set the standard, that's way. And if you go over to Gamash's over there, there was a development that was put in that is pretty up to par all the way through it. In fact, they got upset when they got charged for their part of the homeowner's fee for the extra land.
But, yeah.
A few of them did, most of them understood it, but they do have a very good, the last I knew, a
HOA.
good homeowners association. Because they do have to take care of, they have to plow their
So-
own road, there's 3 roads in there that have to be plowed.
Does town of St. Albans or Milton have some strong verbiage around anything? Are we the only ones that have struggled with something like?
No, just some towns don't care as much. Private roads are an issue in a lot of towns. It's like stormwater, a lot of people assume the road's gonna be taken over, but then they've gotta get it up to standards a lot of times, and then there's no guarantee, and it becomes a pretty expensive investment.
Which is why you guys made a new policy.
Yes, yes.
You learn working in this business. When my wife and I were looking at houses like 5-6 years ago, I was like, anything on a private road? No. Anything built since this? No. Because like, there's just these surprises that pop up.
But it sounds like, at least to me, and what you were speaking to there, Adam, is that we need to protect our
Yeah.
citizens. And I think what it comes down to, right, is there's the first, which is the handoff between the developer and the homeowner, which we need to ensure that there's education piece there, and that is a seamless transition, that the homeowners association, if it's gonna be set up for development, they are fully understanding the permits that are backing that they need to maintain. So I think there's an education piece there, because otherwise it's a ticking time bomb. Even if that 30 years, you're saying it's gonna last that, if they lapse one time 28 years later, we're now back to 0, right? We need to catch all the way back up. So it's an education piece there too, where I know for ours, it was a bit of waiting because the last house was still being built for our development before any HOA was passed over or anything like that. So there was a time gap there in between when I got my keys versus when we actually got even paperwork on the HOA that we would be joining. So it was, in the closing documents, all that stuff. But like, there was some time there where I think there could be some loss of information. And I think that that's critical, that if there's anything that we can put in for protection of those new homeowners to ensure that that's who we're representing here, that's who need to be protected, that's what we build in.
agreed.
Could I just add, maybe something in that language could state that when the permit is given from the town, that you know, that the HO, or whatever you call it, organization has to register with the town yearly. Make it their responsibility, and if they don't, then the town, somebody from the town can, you know, check into it, so you know, whether than have somebody in our office, have to do them all, put the responsibility on them. I think that's fair. I mean, it's their development, you know, and it's not our fault. These are regulations that, you know, the state has put in place, and, you know, we're obligated to live with them, and I don't think we gotta make it so it's not impacting our taxpayers anymore than it has.
No, whose fault? I tend to find it is, and it's the closing attorneys. So you build this development, the first set of homeowners know and keep up the HOA.
Yeah,
And then in 15, 20 years, they all move out.
my God.
And people don't talk to their neighbors like they used to. So like so what happens is that second, third generation of owner is where you're like, they never knew about the HOA, they never knew about the permit, they didn't know they were buying on a private road and what that meant. And it's like, that's where like either the realtor or the closing attorney needs to explain that to them, because they also don't come into the
realtor should be
town.
explaining it.
Well,
and
you
say,
would think
well-
their lawyers would do a title search.
Well, they do, but the
Well,
title-
but they don't read them. I mean, perfect example is the house I lived in. When it was purchased, when I moved in, there was a spot in there that was picked up that it said HOA. And I went over to John Boucher next door, and he says, there's never been one here. I'm like, all right. And nobody brought it up. Nobody brought it up. There's been tons of sales over the last 12 years on Jones Court. Nobody's talked about it. It's gone missing. So the
Maybe
people
we-
who are doing the title searches, they ain't doing a good job.
I guess not.
I'm thankful that
Well,
they
and I
are,
think there's.
but, you know,
No, they're not.
But is that where it comes
I
back
bought
to
plenty
having
of real
a
estate
check-in
with
with the town though?
Yeah,
We have
that's
a
the way
board
it
meeting and all the heads of these HOAs and the presidents of these HOAs have to annually come in to certify like, we're up
maybe
to snuff with our certificate, we are good to go.
And then if they don't, we go
Yeah.
kind
Do
of.
you require like a certificate of compliance before any closing in this town, like to
Amy
make sure-
does those.
Every, not new build.
Not new builds, but I don't think new build's your issue, because most people realize they're buying in a new development, things are.
Yes.
I wonder if in that process, and we can build in here, part of that certificate of compliance before you get it from the state, the town, before you can close is, you do realize you have a stormwater permit for this neighborhood. You do realize an HOA is required.
That's a good point.
And have it as part of that, because
That's
even if
fine.
we put it in here, no one's reading it.
grandfather.
I know, but
That
even if
goes
you,
into the
but going
enforcement
forward, even if we put it in
Yeah,
here,
but
no
that
one's
doesn't
reading
keep
this
the
stuff.
organization together.
The developer and
It
us.
does go back to the
and-
enforcement.
I love what I do, but let's be real, people don't read what we.
Right.
So, just to,
Yeah.
Corey, what you could do for us is see if you can find
Yeah.
some so what we've been doing is we get into these big conversations, right? Even at our meetings, like Jim will show up and have something and we'll be like, Corey, can you find some boilerplate? There's gotta be someone out there that has
Dealt with this already.
dealt with this and has something similar. I think it does go to enforcement, and where my brain immediately goes, because I know, especially in the town, and I know, you know, some of our select board, like, goes to enforcement and it goes to increased costs on the town, right? So that's the line we straddle. It's obviously needed, right? And we've gotta do something, but it is going to potentially increase, like having a meeting and having someone track, like adding that to Amy's plate is going to increase costs. So it's been a balance, right, at where we see, and are we talking about a ton of money? No, but we know you guys are doing the best you can to keep things affordable.
We'll have a solution, I don't know what it looks like yet.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I'll be curious. Bill, Jones Court's the only subdivision in the village, correct? That,
We have 2 3-acre rules. You're sitting on one and Jones Court's the other.
that's, okay.
To
I was just gonna look up.
In the village?
clarify, we own that. We signed off on a responsibility from an orphaned permit. So the village signed off on that in 2016. So it's our problem. So
Right.
double your problem though.
Right,
Right, you live there
Wow.
and you're trustee, so.
yeah, the position I'm in.
That's why
And that's what a lot of towns did,
That
which
is-
they're finding themselves in trouble with now, and that's
Yeah.
where the utility comes in, but to your point, they all try to help out the neighborhoods that no one can afford a $500,000,
No one's going to,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
The other thing that you guys will see, and as I flip through, is definitions is huge. There's a lot of words, and what do these words all mean? So I got to the end, and I did want you guys to know that again, in definitions, pursuant to 19 VSA 1, like, we tried our best to just like send it right to the state, because if they redefine what required agricultural practices are, it's automatically what we have. Simple, easy, and things of that nature. The other thing we did, and if people see stuff, tried to eliminate some of these definitions for things we didn't even have in the document. Like, it's defined, but where is it in here? Or it's in here, but it's not defined. And we didn't get everything.
We did our best. We try to consolidate. Like bed and breakfast is a good example. We have this long definition. We went to a shorter one that basically said the same thing.
Sign. If you look at that,
we got rid of things that we thought were self-explanatory, like boathouse didn't need its own definition. We get what a boathouse is generally. Board, we know the board in this case because it says it earlier in the document that this DRB is the board under the under the legal framework of this. We got rid of like funeral parlor, but added in funeral home because no one really calls it a funeral parlor anymore. So we changed terms like that. We looked at definition of camps. There was actually quite a bit of debate about that. Like cemetery had a long definition. We just said a site to inter or otherwise store the remains or cremations of deceased people. We looked at other towns for where we could consolidate definitions where it made sense just to save. I find the select or your planning commission finds the longer these documents are, the less likely people are to read them and use them. So where we could consolidate, we tried to. Like childcare facility is a good example of that. We had this long definition that explains what a childcare facility is. Well, it was always, you had it here, as defined in 33 BS8, and then you just repeated the definition. So we're like, just say, as defined in 33 BSA 4902 3A.
It's a hyperlink and go.
In hyperlink and go, and we can save, you do that 15 times and you're gonna save 10 pages. Or 6 pages or 7 pages.
And I think at least as far back as I can remember, and Joel, if he was here, might, and Jim maybe can talk to well before I was probably born.
Come on now. I know I'm old.
I don't think we've ever like gone page by page, right? Typically, these reviews in the past have been done by regional or an outside contractor. And in my experience, what I saw, at least at the beginning when I first got on this board, was someone went through this, made a bunch of changes and put it before the board, and we read it, and okay, like, this is what regional's saying we should be doing, or these are the updates per regional. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, if anybody's really like gone through in a long time to like look at, does this even fit into our town? So I know this has taken a really long time, but it's also something that we felt should have been done a long time ago.
And things we did, like we had planned, we're gonna get to these 15 pages tonight, and 4 people would show up and we'd have a 3-hour long conversation with them, and that pushes you out 2 more weeks. But you heard the neighbors, like this issue, like if you would have showed up at a meeting, we would have spent an hour talking about it. We might not address everything we planned that night, but we would have then come back next meeting with new language and try to adjust that concern. So, takes time, but.
A lot of this zoning bylaws is piecemeal.
Yeah.
Yes.
It dealt with a present problem. What you're saying now is that you're going through the whole thing all at once. I don't know if that's been done in ages. I don't remember it ever being done.
And that's
Planning the town plan, yes.
Yeah.
But
we treated it very similar to that. Like we went, dug in. I mean, we took definitions. We went through 4 other towns' definitions, put them in a sheet. And Amy went through them, and we went through them and said, here's our definition, here's their definitions, here's words we defined that they didn't define, should we still define them? Here's words they defined that we didn't define, should we add them into our definitions? And like I said, we pretty much stuck around Milton, St. Albans Town, Swanton, we kind of try to stay within communities in our part of the state that look and feel and
Similar. Or we
to ours,
strive.
and we try to like align town and St. Albans just because the growth centers are right there next to each other and try to make things make sense.
One thing I will say, and having attended quite a few planning and DRB meetings in Milton, and looking at their permit process, my goal would be to look deeper into that in the future, because they do a very good job. And so heading into this, I had that in my head because of some projects that my grandfather's involved in down there, and having to attend meetings with him. It's like, they come in and their staff has done a review, their board has done a review, they put some paperwork in front of their board members. Okay, we've already done the work, the homework essentially, but again, that goes back to cost. So, because they do have the staff, I don't know, they probably have 3 or 4 people in their office, Corey, in zoning and planning over there?
They have a full-time planner and a full-time zoning administrator.
They also have a different grant list.
They do, but I mean, looking at that and knowing
They
how
did 20 years ago.
that's where my brain goes, and the southern growth is our growth, and Earl came in and I think hit the nail on the head. We gotta add, some of these things and tweak our image of that, because that's gonna be our easiest bang for our buck in our future, especially if we can hook into St. Albans City, is kind of where my brain goes, so.
Well, another issue in Swanton is the amount of land that is already conserved. So it limits where we can go, and in some ways that makes things easier because you can plan for those areas and do the zoning appropriately in those areas.
You can't grow.
Yeah.
We're close to 50%.
Yeah.
I think we're
State,
higher than that.
federal.
I think we're a little higher than that now.
I thought it was like 46, 47, but.
It could be, I mean, you're only one transaction
Anyway,
away from
yeah.
getting over 50.
They've taken away 50% of our future
Yeah,
by doing what they're doing. Yeah.
so,
And just for
state,
reference,
federal,
environmentalists in the state of Vermont's goal is to conserve half the state, so even if that's an aspirational goal, and if that's the aspirational goal, you've already met it, so realistically, you shouldn't want any more conservation in your community, you put half aside there. Grow, yeah, like.
so when land trust comes to you next time.
Well, if you're looking at things from a sustainable point of view for the future, you're gonna need that land.
Yeah.
But you also need land for growth for our children, our grandchildren, that's sustainable too. We're not asking for everything, we're asking to be reasonable.
Balance. Yep. And that was part of the spur. We had one district that was 3-acre lot minimums. Took and made it 1, 1 acre minimum lot size, try and spur a little growth. That's, French Hill, West Swanton was a part of that,
Yeah.
Conservation Rec. There's a lot of recreation and conservation on French Hill. There's a ton of state land, the St. Albans Town Forest. West Swanton's got all of the refuge and some state lands. It's like, okay, let's put some houses. They've got plenty of land that they can use for free there. So
What's our option going forward? And I'm not criticizing what's been going on in the past, but I certainly wouldn't want to see it in the future. Can we stop the sale of development rights?
I
don't think you can approve what I would recommend if you guys had we had a similar conversation in another municipality I helped out with. We brought in the land trust and we said, look.
I don't think they care. I think they'd like every square foot in Vermont conserved.
Oh, somewhat, but we could build into your town plan. We gotta do a small edit with our new districts to the town plan, so we could add in there. Your goal is to conserve half the town, and once you hit that, we don't want any more, because they'll look at your town plan.
Yep.
And have deference to that. But no, the argument we got in with them is they conserved all this land around a road that the town had a public road for, and now it had like 1 home on it, which should have never been a town road, but politics and 30 years prior, it became a town road. But you could never build another house on it, so now you're in a situation where the town's like, well, we're gonna throw up this road, it's only ever gonna have this one house on it, why are we paying for 6/10 of a mile of road that needs to get paved and plowed and salted and upkept for one homeowner? Cause you just conserved all the land on both sides, and we threw a fit. I don't think they ever threw up the road, but that's where you kinda get into these, I even said then was like, conserve 400 feet off the road, but allow us to build homes along the road, or.
So you think we
They're
might be
open to
able to
that.
pursue that though,
I think if
out
it,
of policy?
I think if you had a policy, as long as the state doesn't preempt it, I think land trust understands. I don't think they're in a situation like they are in Swanton. You guys are in a unique situation because northwestern Vermont is growing faster than anywhere, and we've already conserved that. Most of the places that get conserved are like up in the Northeast Kingdom, or like Montgomery wants to be 80% conserved, okay, but that's not on I-89, that's not right at the Canadian border, that's not 35 minutes from Burlington, there's a lot of issues that you guys don't fit the mold of what usually tends to get conserved a
Yeah, 'cause
lot.
I mean, they're
But if it's in the
strangling
plan,
us.
then,
They're strangling our
if
future.
we say 50% is it, then it's it.
Yeah,
Do-
they do take difference to that.
They still, and it's been a while, but I remember when Doc went into land trust, I believe land trust came to our meeting, or is it you guys that see those?
It goes to the select board.
Goes to the select board.
But then did it, at some point, I don't know if maybe Doc just came in to talk to us, I can't remember, but I do remember seeing one of those at one point.
Well, the situation there too goes back in history. That place went under foreclosure and was under the control of the government for a while, federal government. And all of the wetlands was taken out and conserved by the federal government. And there were some other recommendations made with that.
Where was that, Ross?
Well, on Route 7?
Farm.
On Route 7, yeah.
Remember Francis
Yeah,
Burfield?
It's got quite
When
a history.
he
to it.
added some more probably 5-10 years ago, and I remember a letter, I remember Jimmy opening it up at our meeting and going through it, and I don't know if it was just a notification letter to us and you guys acted on it, I don't remember the whole, but that's the last time I've seen land trust stuff.
And to Jim's point there, even though you have 50% land trust or about, doesn't mean your whole other 50% is buildable, because you got wetlands, you got shoreline protection, you got other things on that land that, like, you're never gonna build on wetlands in Vermont anymore. And that
You
might
couldn't
not,
build Jones Court.
you know, but like that's not conserved.
Lavoy Ave, I mean, that's,
Or to Swanton,
that's
anyway.
wet.
That's,
So, yeah,
that's very wet.
So you got that other issue. One other piece that this brings up before we kind of wrap up the definitions.
Yep.
Because of global warming and more people living in their camps longer, we did change the definition of seasonal from 180 days to 200 days. Because it's kind of, most people now move in April and stay through October, and you start counting and you're like, oh, they're probably getting in trouble at that 180 days, so we shifted it to 200.
But we're not enforcing it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
But
knocking on those doors.
just to try and, yeah.
Heidi, did your questions get answered?
Well, I was curious, just,
Questions.
about the TSA area, you mentioned there were changes to that. Could
Yeah,
you
we're getting
just
rid of
touch-
it.
So what does that mean? And do you
It's
have a
gonna be-
new map that
So we're
would
waiting for
show-
regional to actually finish it. So they're,
So we don't have no maps
Okay,
tonight
so-
yet.
yeah, we'll have it in the final go through. But yeah, so we're just gonna convert that to, I think it's your central business district, the same kind of, basically you see from Dunkin' Donuts down.
All the way down.
Yeah, it's gonna hit the same.
And we did look at the permitted and conditional uses of those districts, and they were all,
Same.
yeah, essentially the same. Like, we had multiple districts, but they were essentially the same requirements. Does that make sense? So it was like, there may be something specific that you guys have in mind that does not work or got left out, but, doing a look at them, it's like, well, we're essentially talking about the same thing, and there's 3 districts that are all bang, bang, bang down through that are the same. Try to uniform
The map that you
things
could
a little
bring
bit.
up and then just kind of.
Is it gonna make it,
Residential allowed in
Like an old map and just kind of
commercial
give us.
district?
Yeah, it's the last page. I'll just,
In that specific one, it would be, if you go to like section 2.4, 7, central business, permitted uses, accessory use structure, auction house, day spa, financial, office, personal, public, restaurant, retail sales, professional.
So what we're,
And then conditional is down through there, multifamily.
so what we're talking about,
The other thought is,
this part, the TSA district is just right here. It's
essentially
really
here.
here. And we were gonna include it in the pink, which also kind of hits Route 7 corridor, and then out here as you're heading out of town, because theoretically, you want the districts to look the same. And we thought, well, you got a municipal complex here, which is taking up a good chunk of that, and then you already got Hannaford's and a shopping center taking up the other good center piece of it. You know,
It wouldn't hurt us
this,
on
not
that
bringing these district standards in here, but these standards there, so it really went, to Ross's point there, we didn't find the reason, I think the big thing that at the time you guys didn't want car dealerships straight off your interstate exit, I think was the big difference, might have been the one, but I think that, if I remember right, like that was like one of the big differences.
The way that we understood the current conditions here was that there is no potential for residential to be developed.
Within what district? That?
Within the TSA.
TSA? Okay.
It was not a conditional use.
So TSA is now gonna become central business, which has a conditional use of multifamily. If that's what you were inferring
Yeah.
for.
She was asking about single residences.
And any residential use
Yeah, you would be able to build
changes things for us.
you'd be able to build residential in there now.
What is neighborhood commercial light turning into?
Just neighborhood commercial. Cause right now you have neighborhood commercial light, and so we're just combining the two.
I know that there's a couple properties for sale right now on that, so I'm just like, I don't even know what the differences are between
Yeah.
them. I know neighborhood commercial light is, what makes it that one?
So neighborhood,
That would be commercial light was on page
I'm trying to look up
2.28.
It's 221 for neighborhood, well, transitional commercial.
read that. Hold on. I think you got a better map up there.
Yes, in 221.
Swan.org.
So Heidi, you're referring to single-family residential within there, which is not, or are you?
Just any residential.
In general?
We've been interacting with Brownfields about
Yep.
neighboring property, and cleanup plans would be dependent on potential use in the future.
I see.
Not just what our intentions are, but what's allowed in the district.
Yep.
So it's a big change from no residential use at all. So like neighboring properties could be developed with residential, so then you're in a different category for cleanup.
I follow you.
We could call it an overlay, I think for us, we were trying to cut the number of districts and
And
in a
again,
housing crisis, honestly, none of us thought it was bad to add housing to every district.
Absolutely, I understand what you're saying.
But we could do, it could be an overlay, we could just say on those properties, you're in this overlay, which means no housing's allowed in those specific, that's the difference, but not creating a whole separate, overlays aren't, they are what they are.
It does just change the intention of the district, because the intention of TSA is you hop off the interstate and it's gonna be just things that you would wanna see, not residential. It's gonna be gas stations or convenience stores or certain things that you would need for.
or housing, lodging.
Yeah, lodging
When
establishment.
would the new bylaws go into effect?
They go in, I think it's 21 days or 30 days past whenever the select board approves.
So we're still a couple months out from that.
Yeah, but isn't there a certain meeting that
No,
takes?
so once you warn it, they're actually effective technically. Once we warn the meeting with the final language that the planning commission has, anyone can come in and get a permit under those bylaws. But they don't officially take effect till days, but it's so that way too. Yeah, so you gotta play that area.
So just a clarifying question there.
Yep.
Since we're changing quite a few of these and combining quite a bit, do we know how many lots are now eligible to possibly have residential where historically they were not?
I think the TSA is the only district that doesn't allow
That's the
residential.
only, okay.
Every other, industrial wouldn't, but we didn't change any of the industrial districts. I'm looking, neighborhood commercial light is only this little bit of area.
I guess I never realized that residential wasn't even allowed.
That's not a neighborhood commercial light.
It says it does have
You
lodging,
get a nightclub now.
Lodging,
mixed
yeah.
use.
Makes sense.
Guess I never.
And that area, that TSA area is only on the west side of the interstate.
Correct. Correct.
It's
The other
McDonald's,
side.
Hannaford's, this complex. I don't know the exact lots, but it's not.
Now, on the right side of, the east side of the interstate, going to Highgate, what is that zone?
That's that.
Soaking wet.
Commercial light.
That's the, okay, all right, that's what I thought it was.
Wetlands.
Soaking wet.
Not all of it, not all of it.
The interstate's holding the water
Yeah,
back.
right.
Right.
I think that's in the wetlands, isn't it?
Could be.
So I mean, yeah, that's a big,
There's a piece you should know
it's
there.
big for you guys.
We have plans.
The interstate
We're talking about
was
current plans.
not a
We'll announce
wetland.
next week. Electric
He took the soil
department.
away.
But it gives us a plan C.
So is there, do you see it being an issue having residential there? Other than so the Brownsfields is what the issue would be?
I changed the standards with which we have to clean up. Which would be prohibitively expensive.
Oh, yeah. Even lodging too?
Yeah, it'll depend, if we get a successful bond vote for the electric department and they know that's the footprint, it's defined, we hope that we would have to clean up depending upon what we're
Right.
placing there. It's never easy, as you well know.
No,
But if we had lodging, that would add a lot to the grand list, and it would add a lot of expenses, or profits made in electric and sewer, of course. So that'd be really cool to have people, or not cool, depending on what you want, the vibe you want for the town, do you want a hotel there, I don't know. I think it would add a lot to have it right up the interstate.
it's a curveball.
Well, I'd like to thank the planning, commission for all the work you've done, and I know Amy's not here tonight, but I know she did a lot of work on this. And,
Yep.
you know, it's something that, started a couple years ago initially when there was a little bit of a disagreement against the select board and the zoning board of adjustment over a couple of issues. But it wasn't really, the real issue was the zoning bylaw. And, you know, we needed to change them, and I believe this will serve the community a lot better. You know, that stormwater is a big issue, and I'd like to see the new proposed language, Corey.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, send it to Brian or Christina, and then she can pass it around to the other select board members, because that is a critical issue, you know, for the town, and it is for the village too. But I wanna thank you guys for the work you've done, and, if we got nothing more, I'll entertain a motion from the select board to adjourn our special meeting.
Actually, could I ask a question? I've been put into the Robert Pierce Greenmount Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah, go ahead, Robin.
Hi, I got a quick question. Section 246. Looking at permitted uses, it says single-family dwelling. small multifamily 2-4 dwelling, both singular. I know when we looked at, I think it's specifically at 6 South River Street. I know when we looked previously, I asked, I believe I was told
Okay.
only one building. And then you go down to E district requirements, it says PUDs are allowed. It would really help us in working out what we can do with the site if 6 and 7 are permitted uses for plural, not singular.
6 and 7 under permitted uses.
What page is that?
Um,
I thought you said
It's
2.6.
page 2-15.
215.
Okay.
You have the residential district, he's saying that it's you're doing number 7, small multi-family units, 2 through 4 dwelling, and I think his proposal for that land was 6. Up to 6 dwellings.
So you have conditional use for multifamily dwelling, which would be over 4. Permitted use, and just the changes, so he could build 6 dwellings there. Now under this, he just has to go for the DRB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can still do it.
Is that,
But 2 to 4 don't have to go in front of the DRB. Amy would be able to give that permit just
In-house.
because it's permitted.
Okay.
Conditional use
6.
is 6, it could be more, it could
4
be
to-
20 units,
4
it
to
could be
40,
whatever,
yeah.
you know, they could go in, they just need to go to the DRB to get approval.
But does the word need to be plural instead of single?
Well, we can look at it.
Yeah.
Dwellings,
Yeah,
we
let's do a
can-
single family.
Reads better with dwellings, so
Yeah.
fine doing that.
so you're looking at multiple single-family dwellings? Is that what your
Well,
question is, Robin?
we're not sure. I'll just give you a quick example. It depends on the partner families. At the moment, we're working with some partner families and some have a family member with a disability. Others have other needs. So we don't custom build, but we try to build in a way that's beneficial to a particular family, not a generic family. So I was just looking for a little bit of flexibility in case that came up in Swanton. Does that answer your question?
What do you mean particular? You mean needing a ramp?
Some might need a ramp. There's another family where one of the family members is very susceptible to loud noises. So that would have to be an individual home, not attached to another home. So there's different parameters that come in that you can't really think of until you meet the families. So I was just trying to look for a little bit of flexibility.
Oh.
So you were looking under permitted uses to be able to have multiple single-family dwellings on one lot?
Well, it would be a PUD. So maybe, we just don't know at this point in time. We're just looking.
Which is a conversation we had, so not to cut you off, Robin, but we did have a conversation about that, making
Yeah, like
that
cottage
easier.
courts and some of these other
Yeah.
things that are
They're-
starting to become more well-known in development in rural or urban areas, but we said that ought to all be contemplated in a PUD setting. Which is a
Right,
planned,
Unified parking spot.
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Similar, but not similar to what Richard Cummings is doing some stuff in the Southern Growth that are these little cottages, and the thought was almost like those communities you might see in the South. Like small homes, potentially shared parking,
They look-
shared.
they look something like this.
We had a conversation about that.
Yeah, these aren't, this isn't like a perfect example, but you kinda get the feel that you take a lot,
Yeah.
you create parking back here, and then you'd have these individual single-family homes.
Sure.
Maple Tree Place.
Rob, yes,
Yeah,
Maple
and
Tree.
people could walk.
Yeah.
Robin,
It's
can you
kinda a
see
way
the
to make
screen?
homes cheaper.
I will in a minute, yes, I was just reading the, okay, yeah, our go-to for a long time has been 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms. We're finding that sometimes that's too large for a family, sometimes it's too small, so we're trying to come up with, more options for families, just to make sure that they're getting what they need.
So I guess, I wanna make sure we tweak any way we can. I wanna understand exactly what you think would help. Cause I still
Yeah, I
feel like
mean,
I'm confused.
Sorry, yeah, well, I just thought, if in the same section you say single-family dwelling, and in the next page you say PUDs, it would seem to be more consistent if it was dwellings, because that would be in a PUD.
He just wants you to add an S to the word.
Think so.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. That's easy enough.
Yeah,
I thought it was a little more in-depth than that, but okay.
Two people separated by the same language, sorry.
Okay, well, thanks. Sorry we made you sit so long.
No worries.
Well, at least 6.
Judy?
Yeah, Judy.
I'm looking at transitional commercial district, which is on 221, and I noticed that home occupation is not included. Is that a term that's being made redundant?
I don't know if there's any homes there.
But yeah, I live in it, and the house right next door to me, which is for sale, is in
Okay.
it. That's neighborhood commercial light. It's right on North River Street. So I'm trying to figure out, is a home occupation still an option? It was number 26 on your previous zoning thing, and because that does have Swanton water and sewer, for the setbacks that you said are changed.
Could it be covered under,
Which district are you looking
she's talking under,
Industrial?
transitional,
Yes,
was
that's
neighborhood
Commercial
commercial.
light, now that's transitional commercial, unless I'm looking at the wrong one, right? That was. neighborhood
Um,
commercial.
I'm wondering if it could be covered under professional services.
I don't, I'm not, I haven't. looked
Or
at that.
you have a permitted use for office and professional service, I mean, we can slide it in, I mean,
Specifically, home occupation is kind of different, and I believe, I don't know.
That's
if
a cottage industry is under conditional use as well.
Industry, is that the same as home occupation, that's the same thing now?
What is home occupation defined as?
These are, and we do have multiple definitions for very similar
Is home
things too.
occupation still a definition is kind of the question too, because if it's not, if it's all falls under cottage industry, it's not a big deal.
I think we took it out because
No,
Does
it
work.
says a small business located on the operator's residential property has an accessory use that does not alter the residential character of the property.
That
That's
was,
home-based occupation.
That's home occupation.
Yeah.
occupation.
Home
Yeah,
occupation, yeah.
that's the
And
definition.
cottage industry is an expanded home-based business conducted by the resident of a single-family dwelling, which is carried on within the principal dwelling and/or an accessory structure and has no more than 10 non-resident employees.
so home occupation, I think that's a state thing.
You just want us to add it to that district.
Well, if, it's just suddenly missing, it's not
Yeah, no.
marked off, I'm just wondering if it.
Was it there before?
I don't know
Yes,
what
it was.
district she's
Under
in.
neighborhood commercial light, it was on the next. page.
Yeah, it just wasn't in neighborhood commercial, which we might have just been an oversight on us.
When we
Oh,
pushed,
we crossed it out.
we pushed neighborhood commercial into neighborhood,
We turned it into
commercial.
cottage industry.
yep,
We turned home.
That was one of those
occupation into
things-
cottage industry.
that got merged
Yeah,
and one of the
yeah.
things that got missed.
Yeah, though, which is fine, I'm just
Yeah.
asking.
Oh, that's,
Now,
that's why we're here.
thank you, at the beginning of the meeting, you had said that, you can't require a lot size bigger than,
An accessory
1/5 an
dwelling
acre or
unit.
8,700 square feet, if it has water and sewer, if it's residential, or if it's, does that mean?
That's a state
That's
requirement.
state law, so in my, specifically in my property and the one that's right next door that's for sale, that's, you know, and across the street that's for sale. I thought, but, does that mean that they can put, that the setbacks are changed on those properties now?
Because
You
you're,
mentioned something about the setbacks at the beginning of the meeting changed, if you,
so your lot's already grandfathered,
yeah,
your size.
yeah.
The setbacks in that district did all get much smaller. So you can use more of your lot.
I don't see.
We
that it
didn't
was
change
changed.
setbacks in the transitional commercial district. We just did it where there was residential. What we did do is increase lot coverage from 30% to 60%.
Okay.
So setbacks haven't changed, is that correct?
And that-
Because your setbacks are already at 15 feet,
Your
That's
usable
why.
land is more generous.
you already had the more generous usable land where residential wasn't, I think their setbacks were 30 feet. In the
Setbacks.
residential,
Okay, so 15 feet inside, 30 from the front, okay, so
Yep.
so now you're just kind of making it the same for everybody, that's,
And
yeah,
these
that
ones,
residential district's gonna have that same setback that you've always had.
okay, excellent,
Cause theirs was, I think, 25 or 20 and we went to 15.
okay,
on the sides and in the back.
okay. Awesome.
So, and again, like what Heidi brought up, we took 2 districts and, they look pretty close.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we might have missed a couple things or didn't think of those things, but looking at them, okay, 90% of it's there, like, put them together and simplify some stuff, so. And,
Yeah, we went to 15 feet, which matches yours, in a lot of those districts. We shrunk setbacks quite a bit.
yep, and increased lot coverage, meaning that parking lot, right? So it's not just your roof, it's anything that is impervious. Yep, is
Yeah, we
great
no longer
drastically.
talk about building coverage anymore, we call it just lot coverage, and you decide if it's driveway, building, sidewalk.
So you got a 1 acre lot and it's 65% lot coverage, you could pave 65% of that lot, could be paved now. It used to be 30, right? So,
And that was a concern we heard from a number of businesses, that they couldn't expand
Yeah.
because of lot coverage, and so
actually, right next to you, there's one business that can't expand its parking because of lot coverage, Lost Nation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So they came in early on, so this allows them to grow their business and.
Yep, so there's
Community, or
a
if you wanna
few,
get a restaurant in this community, they need parking and lot coverage and.
Maple City Candy's for sale, would be a lovely spot for a nice restaurant that's in walking distance to.
brewery restaurant.
Yes, let's do that.
I do wanna say too, I appreciate you guys picking up on that, and that's part of the reason why we're having this meeting. The last time we came into one of these, we walked into a select board meeting, I remember Jim Hubbard putting the paperwork down, and I don't remember who was on the board, but had a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like, we're at the end, and it would have sucked in 2 months from now for you to come in and say, you know, this is what we got, so that's kind of why we're here.
Yeah, it's great work, it really is.
Yes, thank you.
A big improvement.
I mean, Corey was the
Corey was the
leader of the
spearhead.
show, you know, like, he helped motivate us through the whole thing, so.
You're gonna get
He
through
has so
this
much
tonight.
knowledge about stuff
Okay.
too.
There were some nights I had to force them, stop talking, let's keep going.
Some nights it was like, okay, we gotta go, this is bad. So, Earl already made his motion, I think it's on the floor.
Go, you just that other one.
Earl, you made a motion to adjourn?
Yep. Now, the select board part, now you younger trustees, I'm sorry, yes, Eugenie, you're still young to me, okay?
I'd entertain a motion.
Say again.
I'll second that.
I didn't make a motion, I entertained one.
I'll make a motion.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
I like it. I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded, any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Oliver, you're there still.
I thought you bailed.
Still here, ready for the village as well.
What a treat.
So move to adjourn.
Perfect.
First, second.
Thank you, everybody, job well done.
Thank you.
Who's that? Who was that? I think it was God.